Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tongue. Today, my guest is Evelyn Lee. I'm super excited to have Evelyn back in a way. Evelyn has been speaking at one of the conferences I organized last year, which is Heroes of Architecture. And I love following her content. She produces incredible podcasts and content for practice owners and people that are in business of architecture. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about her origin story, about her work, and also the community that she's helping, architect community. So Evelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
It's
Especially
awesome.
right before the weekend.
I
So,
know. It's a great start to the weekend.
yes.
Especially for me because it's 6 p.m. here in Europe. So okay, brilliant. So Evelyn, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're an architect who shifted into technology industry. So I'm very interested to find out about your origins and then sort of what made that choice happen for you.
Yeah, it probably doesn't seem very linear, but I feel like my trajectory was actually pretty linear. I was an architect. I'm licensed. I actually worked on K through 12 schools, universities, community colleges, and community centers and government buildings. I also supported several of the last firm I ever worked at, doing architecture, their pro bono initiatives. So, but what I found, and especially in California, there's these systems that I would say I are well intentioned. I think this is like with all building codes too, right? Systems in place that are well intentioned, but they're a bit broken. So I also dealt with, doing schools in California. It's the contractor with the lowest bid always wins, which means, there's a saying that they're trying to change order their way to a profit. So there's like literally the contractor is at odds with you the entire time looking for mistakes in your drawings. And granted, there are some amazing contractors out there, but there's also just some contractors who are using this method. So that really wore on me, and so I had an opportunity to leave practice, go to a nonprofit organization called Public Architecture, and run a program called um, the one. It was the 1%. I think they renamed it the One Plus organization, but essentially it asked 1%. It asked architects to give 1% of their billable hours towards the public good pro bono, and then my goal was to begin to match architects who had pledged that 1% to nonprofits were in need of projects, because we had a lot of participants in the program. This is pre the the last like major recession. Architects were doing really well, but they're like, we're having problems finding nonprofit project or nonprofit partners, even or nonprofit projects. And what I learned through that is I really didn't have the language that I needed to talk to the nonprofits about the value that architects bring to the table, right? I think we always joke about how we have our own archist speak. Um, but in the same instance, I feel like that also means that we've missed out on some of the broader dialogue or language when it comes to talking about our value proposition to the broader public. So that was a 1 year stint. It was only ever really meant to be a 1 year stint while my friend was spending the year away from public architecture. So he came back and I went to grad school. I went and got my MBA, and then I extended and I got my MPA, which is a master's in public administration. I would say the MBA is very much more analytical, versus the MPA is more analytical and I would say quantitative. But the MPA, which is known for helping people who are interested in going into nonprofit work or working in the government, but it's really more focused on organizational development and management. So it's more qualitative. So how do you write better surveys? And how do you run better community stakeholder engagement processes, essentially, was some of the big takeaways from that program. And then from there, I went back. I took a break from architecture. I realized I missed it, so I found a path for me that was parallel to architecture, but not necessarily back in practice. So I was part of a strategy group that was in an architecture practice. And the whole reason why I actually really loved it there, because the whole reason why they started the strategy group was they felt that architects got brought to the table too late, and architects also left the table too early. So how do we expand services on both sides of what is considered traditional practice? I think it really helped that firm through the Great Recession. It provided me a platform to talk about how even a small to medium-sized architecture firm can really expand upon their services, increase the value proposition that architects bring to the table. But unfortunately, there wasn't really an opportunity for growth at that firm. So I left and I followed a friend into consulting on the brokerage side, doing the same things I was doing at MK Think, but mostly doing it but doing it for a lot of different workplace clients. So at MK Think, I was doing strategy and strategic planning with universities, with schools, with communities. We had a lovely project at the Sonoma County Library. So I zeroed in and I went into workplace consulting. Brokerage, we can cover brokerage later. If anyone wants to go into the consulting side of brokerage, get in touch with me. I had a very interesting experience there. But then I landed at Slack essentially as a senior experience designer, essentially doing what I was doing with workplace consulting at brokerage, but doing it in-house. So is that a kitty I hear?
He was coming here to say hello,
Good,
He
because I
usually
was talking way too long. So
Yeah, he usually sits halfway through and meows very quietly. And if I ignore him, then he'll come here and be louder.
yeah. Um, so anyways, that's how I landed in technology, and it was really about Slack still is such a wonderful place to be, such a collaborative company, but my bridge was working cross-functionally with our people team, with our leadership development team, with our biz tech team, with our real estate team to really craft what is the overall employee experience. That has obviously shifted a lot since the pandemic, and Slack has since been acquired by Salesforce, and both companies, while operating a little bit independently, both companies, Slack has come out saying we're digital first. Salesforce has their success from anywhere kind of platform. So now we're really understanding what does the office mean for our people? What do we have to change about our office, and how do we support our people no matter where they're working from? Which I think is a question that every architecture firm is beginning to ask, at least the more forward-thinking ones, right? That aren't necessarily in a rush back to practice or rush back into the office.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. It sounds that with the experience since you left practice, you've gotten more of that sort of experience of working with people and problem solving on projects within this entrepreneurial scale of things. And I can imagine that was almost like a green card towards getting into Slack. But can you elaborate a little bit more about that transition? Because I think that with sort of the traditional education of architecture, it's sometimes hard for us to shift and get jobs within the tech industry. I'm sure that with a lot of startups, people can appreciate our background and the way we think as designers. However, there's usually certain requirements that are way beyond what we normally learn and as architects. So I can imagine that you've gotten that experience in between. And that job was very suited for coming from this experience that you've gotten. But how did you find that transition, and can you elaborate a little bit on sort of the spirit of shifting from architecture to the technology company?
Yeah, So it was interesting. Like I found my way a little bit back to arch. So the jump from, I would say, strategy to technology was a little easier. What was
Mhm.
interesting is I found myself out, I graduated with, so I had my MArch as a licensed architect. I had my MBA and my MPA. So I had all of these, what you would believe, like what you would hope would be credentials on my resume or my CV,
Yeah.
right? And for a while, it was just when the great, when the, when I keep saying, the great resignation is going on, but it was just when the last recession was starting to come back a little bit, but people were still slow to hire. And and I remember applying for a while. I didn't focus, right? I was just like, I'm out of school. I've incurred a lot of student debt. I need to kind of reach out and see like where can I actually get a job. I was like, I was pretty confident in myself. I have all these great credentials. Somebody's going to hire me. And I really struggled. So I think, we talk so often about how architects don't, or that the general public doesn't understand the value of architects. I think, in that they also don't understand exactly what we do, right? I was applying to all of these project management roles um, across a variety of different industries, and they're like, "Oh no, you don't have any project management experience." And I was like, "Well, it depends on how you
Yeah.
define project management, right?" I managed a project that was over, like multi-million dollar projects for school districts.
Mm.
I crafted new strategic plans for universities and, you know, um, for like the Sonoma County Library. But so, but I think it was that lack of understanding of what architects do to actually see that true value translate. Now, since then, I would say, all of the major consulting firms have acquired design firms. So I think, and there's been this whole movement about design thinking and its applications to business. So I think there's a better understanding of how you apply design to create better business props, and and it might be easier for architects now, but that transition was actually really hard for me. And it was one of the reasons I did miss architecture, but I also felt like the building industry understands a little bit more of what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Um, so the transition to actually MK Think, I feel was the harder one. I have a Dropbox folder of all the applications that I sent out during that time, and there's probably over 75 applications in there.
Mm.
Thankfully, I haven't had the need to look at that folder in a while. But but the other really disheartening thing too is when I went and I left and I got my MBA and I was telling people I don't want to come back to traditional practice, I didn't have a group to or any, like, a mentor to talk to me about like what that looks like. I knew that there were architects out there, like, I think we graduate all the time with people from undergrad that we probably lost touch with, but they're in other industries. So I knew there's architects out there, or architecturally trained people out there, but I didn't know where they were, and I didn't know how necessarily to find them. So despite my involvement in the AIA, I feel like I confused a lot of people too. They're like, "You got licensed, why are you leaving the profession?" So it was a very kind of isolating moment for me, and it's something that I talk about often on Practice Disrupted, the podcast. But yeah, I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but it goes back to this thing where, as architects, people still really don't understand the full breadth of what we do and the value that we bring. That we are constantly having to deal with multiple different parties, right,
Yeah.
to reach a single goal, usually a successful building on time, and under budget, if or on budget at least. Um, But anyways, so part of the reasons why I started practice of architecture and practice disrupted is just to know that as other people think about this, and they're not necessarily alone out there. But having been in strategy at MK Think, I then had kind of the chops as consulting, and I was in the consulting group in brokerage. So the line from finding my way from consulting to workplace consultant to being internal at tech is pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
I did I found myself, sorry, I had to sneeze. I know we're live too, so I'm like, okay.
Too much thinking.
I don't know,
It's
but
like
yeah,
I was
but
like, oh, salute. No, no, no. It's
but
still
anyways, I
happening
feel
in
like I'm
me.
talking too much, but
Bless you. There it is.
but it's like
Words.
it's um I feel like I'm talking too much, but anyways,
No,
I think
not
I
at
feel
all.
like it was a much more straight line after I found my way to MK Think into tech. What I will say is that I ended up in RUS in tech, which is real estate and workplace services, and that's a very specific role in tech that is like most closely aligned to architecture still. So if I were to move out of RUS, even though I have a background in technology, I th- I think I would still struggle with the value prop there,
Mm-hmm.
um, frankly,
Yeah.
because most people associate workplace and the workplace experience and the built environment as a very specific thing. So if I were to say like, oh, I want to work on the product side, I think people would be like, oh, well, what experience do you have on the product side? Um, Which is funny because all of my architect friends are like, Evelyn, how can you help us on Slack? And I'm like, I'm actually not on the product side. So so I'm like trying to re-educate the architecture population that I'm not on a project side. I don't code. I'm not an engineer. Um, and then I'm trying to educate all of these Salesforce individuals who call themselves architect because architect is a terminology used in
Like building
engineering all
websites
the
and
time and software
yeah.
engineering all the time. And I was like, no, I'm a building architect, and here's kind of what that means. So I'm kind of walking both lines
Yeah.
at the company. Yeah.
No, actually, one of the reasons why I asked you this question is because I think that there is a certain level of attachment that we have towards architecture once we get educated as architects, and it is indeed extremely difficult to make that transition into any industry. And also, what I really liked in your answer was this sort of that sort of ability to be able to like trace your experience as an architect and bring it into a new profession and say, actually, I do have experience running big projects because that's what you do when you're, in a position of building and having to manage teams of designers, and then also the money and the budget, but also a lot of times, if it's design build, the construction side of things. And that sort of experience was mine when I started my own practice. And I think that really was what ignited that belief that I can do entrepreneurial things in the first place, because I felt capable after having that experience of running projects as an architect and seeing the experience of managing teams. We were doing a lot of design build as well, so it was also managing construction, showing up on construction sites every day, and all the money, building materials, transportation of materials to site, all of that. There are little elements, but it is on a big scale, like managing big projects in a tech company or whatever. And so I think that sort of ability to be able to take one experience and bring it into another and sell yourself in a positive manner to these people that perhaps struggle to really understand what architect does,
Hmm.
and how that job looks like. That is also a skill. And I think that um, we as architects, unless we're sort of born with it or our parents are in business and we learn that sort of ability to sell yourself, so we struggle with that a lot. And I certainly at the beginning didn't have that in me. It developed with time as I was doing more and more business. And so a lot of times with my clients, I also see that they struggle to sell themselves properly, and sort of like in a manner where you communicate your best aspects, and also very clearly are able to say how you can benefit the person that you're speaking to, whether it's like an employer or a client, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that it really like enriches our experience, but there are certainly like struggles along the way, and I really appreciate how you openly said that it was difficult, because I know it's a difficult process to leave such a demanding industry that took so much energy to educate ourselves in, and also many people don't just drop out after university. A lot of people, most of them, will give it a go in the practice and realize, actually, oh, it's not for me, for one reason or another, and that shift is hard. So tell me a little bit, like, what led you from that experience to start Practice Disrupted, the podcast, and then also the community that surrounds that. What is sort of the leading mission behind that project?
Yeah, so I think it all started with Practice of Architecture. So I started Practice of Architecture actually when I was in business school. I know it's gone through several iterations. People who have known me long enough probably remember the first iteration. I don't know if Janine would even know the first iteration of what Practice of Architecture was, but it was literally, I was reading all of these articles and these books in business school that we were never asked to read in architecture school, and none of my architecture colleagues, I didn't hear them speaking about them at all. So I was like, well, what if I at least took all of these articles and just curated a collection of things that I think architects might find interesting that
Mm-hmm.
aren't necessarily directly related to the industry, but areas where we can learn from. So the website used to purely be just here's something interesting I found. Let me know if you want to read it. Um, and as it evolved over time, as I actually spent time as a role as a senior kind of account manager to on the strategy team and leading the strategy team. And as I understood that there's greater opportunities to expand upon the traditional model of architecture, I wanted to the site itself began to evolve. Like how can I do more than just post these articles? Is there an opportunity to really support and engage um, not necessarily the large firms, because the large firms have a lot of they have a lot of capital, right, to invest in things like having strategy groups. But is there an opportunity for me to at least support the small and medium-sized firms that are asking, can we be doing it differently? Should we be doing it differently? And I'm sorry, I have to blow my nose.
Okay. It's fine.
And we were so how do I support these small and medium-sized architecture firms and share with them what I'm doing at MK Think and beyond? And ultimately, the ultimate goal, I will say, of Practice of Architecture is to be successful enough to financially support either through accelerator or through angel investing, other services and products that are coming out of architecture practice.
Mm.
So that's the long end game. Um, but but then, as everything does, like, things evolve over time. And I had a great friend, Mark LePage, who I'd talked on and off with. He runs Entree Architect, and I reached out to him saying a long time ago, saying, how is it that you're doing this podcast? Like, tell me about podcasting. What is it? I don't really fully understand podcasting. Um, and he launched the Gable Media Network, and he gave me kind of an opportunity to start Practice Disrupted in a way that and launch my own podcast in a very meaningful way. I think one of the things that architects struggle with, and I still struggle with, is we don't want to put anything out into the world kind of half baked, right? So after I remember getting off a podcast with Mark, and I was like, I don't know if I want to learn production. Like, I just want to record and put it out there. So Mark through Gable Media has given us the amazing opportunity to do that. And by us, I mean Janine Chastain, my co-host, and I, to have this platform to talk about how do we evolve practice in a meaningful way that that takes everything that I've been learning about the employee experience in tech and applies it to the employee experience in architect, but also how do we continue to lift and raise up the value of architecture by expanding the services that we provide, right? I, I feel like I've been involved in the AIA a lot, and even the older generation is talking about how they want to be like the first person that people call, right, when they have a problem, whether or not it's the or the first person that your client calls, no matter what the problem is, whether or not it has to do with the built environment. And for me, in order for you to be that person, or in order for us to be those people, like people have to, one, understand the value of what we bring, and two, understand all the different services that we provide as problem solvers to that value. So then we are the first people that clients call when they run into any sort of um, situation. So so that's kind of how practices of architecture evolved into practice disrupted. And then what Janine and I realized is that it's actually really hard running a podcast. And I imagine even doing these live streams, right, Sarah? You have metrics of who's tuned in, but then it kind of lives in the ether. And unless somebody like actively posts on the YouTube channel, or if somebody like reaches back out to you and say like, Sarah, I love what you're doing with these architecture think tanks, um, there's no way to form community around the people who are tuning in on a regular basis. And that's what the Practice of Architecture Lab is. Mark jokes with us that our podcast is a subset of a subset, right? So we're targeting architects who are forward thinking and want to evolve the industry, which is like world architects, forward thinking architects. But we're really trying to build the community of those individuals that want to think differently, that, and it's not for not loving the profession. It's like, I would say it's actually for a deep love of wanting the profession to continue to remain relevant, and for us to be the problem solvers in the world that we always kind of aspire to be, but then wonder why we kind of fall short at it. So yeah.
Of course. And where's the community? Is it on Facebook or email?
Yeah, so if you go to community.practiceofarchitecture.com, or lab.practiceofarchitecture.com, both go to this community. It's a membership community. We are going to be switching up the membership model shortly to we're going to have multi-tiered access, so hopefully we can get more voices into the community. There's some great conversations going on in there, and like, I'm sure some architects are going to roll my eyes at me, but we had a conversation about blockchain and NFT. We have had conversations about how do you get rid of time cards as an architect, and one of the firm owners in there of Method Group, Josh, he actually has this thing that he calls velocity planning. So, one of the things that I love about being in-house at Slack is never having to submit a time card ever again. So and he's found a way to do that in his practice. Granted, he works with a certain type of client, but velocity planning sounds so much more fun than time cards to me. So yeah.
Exciting. I love that. And I love the model because, Mark has his very big and active Facebook group of 7,000 entrepreneurs in architecture that are connecting on daily basis. And it's lovely to be a part of it. And it works. I love the fact that you're exploring a bit of a different model, which is in some way exclusive because you have to buy into it. But then perhaps people also value it on a different scale, because I seem to value what I spend my money on. So it's like wanting to actually be a part of it, show up and contribute as well and learn. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and that it's a little bit different than what else is there from this sort of community of people that are coaching architects and helping architects grow their practices and businesses. I'm curious to just that one last question about practice operations. If people join your group, what is the sort of main things they will learn for themselves, and who exactly? You said that they are forward-thinking architects, but I can imagine also people that are actually entrepreneurs and run their own practices, or not just employees. But maybe clarify that for me. So your audience, and then what exactly would people learn for their practice operations as they join? Do you guys cover a certain, is it like a mentorship program where you cover certain topics, or is just a community working a little bit like a forum, and within that community some senior architects that have maybe more experience help one another?
I think so. A few things. It is definitely a community that, of people that have followed the work of practice of architecture, but also people that have followed the podcast Practice Disrupted. One promise that we are looking forward um, to making good on is actually bringing our podcast guests into that community so that they can have Ask Me Anything forums there. Um, the other great thing about practice architecture is it's actually really spanning all generations. We have a very young person who I was so excited to kind of welcome with open arms. He joined immediately, paid a full amount for a lifetime subscription. He was maybe 1 year out of school. And I would like to believe that we've helped him navigate to a better employment opportunity. But he joins us during our so twice a month we have some live conversations. One is more of just a gathering, and another one is where we call office hours, where individuals can kind of present something that they're working on, either with their career or with their practice, and all of us can help like dig deeper into that. But then we had an older gentleman that joined just shortly after the new year, and he has been with his firm for, I don't even want to know how many years. And he's not necessarily running projects anymore, but it's definitely a generational thing. He is interested in, as his firm looks at coming back to the office, what that means. What does working in this hybrid modality mean for architects going forward? So it covers a wide range of generations. I think the target audience is really anybody who is interested in practicing, anyone interested in taking a hard look at how we've done business in the past, that are willing and open to kind of question all of those models and ask ourselves, how can we do it better? And then it's also a community that's meant to support anyone who's looking at past, either going deeper into architecture, like I said with a young gentleman that we helped, or anyone who is also interested in finding a new role but still want to remain connected to the built environment. It's one of the things that I think people struggle most with when they consider career switching, is this identity that we have as architects, right? We live and breathe architecture. I think all of us joke that when we when we walk into the restaurant, we're always looking up, right? We're looking at the details. I'm always interested in whether or not the the quality of the craftsmanship in the restaurant extends all the way into the restrooms, right? Because I think that talks about a certain care and love for design by the owner. But yeah, the hardest thing I think when architects consider going away from architecture, but including leaving behind a great team or leaving behind a project that might not yet be finished, I think is there a loss of identity in the switch to another industry? And I would say I hope not. In fact, I would encourage people to kind of be that architect in the other industry to really kind of continue to elevate the voice of the architect going forward and help people understand how the way we think is so critical and crucial and can be a valued part of so many other industries, not just the built environment.
Absolutely. So if people are interested to join you, where exactly do they go? Would you just remind us the websites and the
Yes,
way?
it's a redirect. So there's currently 2 URLs. It's going to live on one, but community.practiceofarchitecture.com or lab.practiceofarchitecture.com. The podcast Practice Disrupted can be found at practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. So basically, if you go to practiceofarchitecture.com, you will see everything there. And if we have any AIA listeners, unfortunately, I haven't set up REBA credits, but you can get AIA CEUs through our courses online. And we have a whole series on running and building a successful hybrid practice. But if you join the lab, you get access to all of those courses, which I guess is another bonus that I didn't even talk about. But yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for that
Excellent.
opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was really a pleasure. And thank you so much, guys, for being connected. I saw that there was quite a few of you that stayed throughout the episode, which is amazing. And so I'm saying big hello and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, Evelyn, for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.